Now she was sitting across from Grant Kessler in the executive boardroom, wondering if she'd somehow stepped into an alternate reality. "Effective immediately," Grant said, his tone flat. "You'll be transitioned to an advisory role. Cassandra Vale will be taking over as lead engineer." The words landed like a punch she didn't see coming. An advisory role meant no access, no authority, no say in the system she had built from the ground up. Nova's eyes shifted to the woman sitting 3 chairs away. Cassandra smiled, the kind of smile meant for cameras, not server rooms. She was polished, photogenic, and utterly unqualified for defense-grade infrastructure. Her resume was marketing gloss, not engineering grit, but she was also the CEO's girlfriend. And apparently, that outweighed 16 years of Nova's flawless record. 2 weeks ago, Nova Elridge had been the company's quiet hero. A sophisticated cyber attack had slipped past every safeguard, heading straight for the secure core of Tri-Span SecureLink, the $1.7 billion communications system binding 3 federal agencies. It was Nova who caught it at 3:15 a.m., rewriting entire segments of code on the fly, sealing the breach before a single classified packet could escape. Her hands had shaken when the final firewall locked into place, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of knowing she had just saved not only the system, but the contract that kept hundreds of people employed. Nova said nothing. She had learned, long ago, that silence could be louder than outrage. Her gaze drifted to the folder in front of Cassandra, through the thin paper sleeve. She could read the bold date stamped across the top. Signed 2 weeks ago. Her breath caught. That was before the government contract had even been finalized, before she had fought off the cyber attack. The realization was a cold blade sliding between her ribs. This decision hadn't been made because of performance or need. It had been waiting for her all along, planned, sealed, and hidden under polite smiles until the moment they no longer needed her. Shock wrapped around her like ice, but disbelief kept her sitting still. She had saved their crown jewel, only to watch them hand it to someone who didn't even know how to hold it. Nova's office had always been a place of quiet focus, the hum of servers beneath the floor, the faint scent of coffee from the machine she'd bought herself after the company one broke. Now, it felt like a crime scene she was being forced to clear. The cardboard box on her desk was too small to hold 16 years of her life, yet somehow it felt too large for what she was being allowed to take. She picked up the framed photo first, her entire engineering team grinning on the day they'd won the National Defense Technology Award. She remembered the weight of that moment, the pride, the handshake from the Secretary of Defense, the knowledge that what they'd built together mattered. Her thumb traced the edge of the frame before she set it gently into the box. Outside her door, footsteps echoed in the hallway. She glanced up, expecting someone to come in. Instead, she caught the flicker of eyes quickly turning away. Colleagues she'd mentored, stayed late with, defended in performance reviews, now walking past as though looking at her might be dangerous. Only one person dared to break the invisible line. Evan Rhodes, her closest friend in the building, stepped inside without a word. He didn't hug her. That would draw attention. Instead, he slipped something into her palm, the cool weight of a security key card. "Yours," he said under his breath. "Not the company's. Keep it. You earned it." His voice cracked just slightly, and then he was gone. Nova stared at the keycard, her fingers curling around it. It wasn't just plastic. It was trust. It was a reminder that not everyone in this place had turned. She continued packing, the quiet broken only by the sound of tape ripping as she sealed a box of old project binders. That's when a soft knock came at the open door. Malik, one of the youngest engineers she'd hired, stepped inside. His face was pale. "I probably shouldn't be telling you this," he murmured, glancing toward the hallway. "But Cassandra, she was in the secure room last week, before the contract was even signed. No clearance? No badge? Grant was with her. Nova's breath didn't quicken, but her grip on the box tightened. She kept her voice even. And? Malik hesitated. She was looking at the core access console, asking questions she shouldn't know to ask. He shifted nervously. I thought you should know. Thank you, Nova said simply, and Malik slipped away. When the door closed, she let her fingers drum once against the cardboard. Quiet humiliation still wrapped around her like a shroud. But beneath it, something sharper was waking. Rage, patient and controlled, took root. They had taken her title, her team, and her office, but they had no idea what else they'd left her with, and no clue what she could still take back. Nova closed the last box in her office and carried it to her car, but she didn't drive home. Instead, she went straight to her apartment, locked the door behind her, and powered up the secure terminal she kept in her study. The soft blue glow of the screen steadied her breathing. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Her fingers moved with muscle memory, typing a string of credentials no one else in the company even knew existed. Within seconds, the familiar interface of Tri-Span SecureLink appeared. To most, it was just a project dashboard. To Nova, it was also the gateway to something she had built in secret. A shadow layer hidden deep in the architecture. She remembered exactly when it began. 3 years ago, during an unannounced security audit, she discovered how dangerously close an external penetration test had come to bypassing the final firewall. The company passed, but the margin was too thin for her comfort. That night, she stayed in the lab until sunrise, sketching a solution no one had asked for, but she knew they needed. She called it the distribution control layer. It was invisible to standard monitoring tools and accessible only through her personal credentials, tied to a biometric scan that required renewal every 90 days. Without that renewal, the layer would automatically shift the system into a protective lockdown, secure, intact, but functionally frozen. Her late father's voice came back to her as clearly as if he were leaning over her shoulder. Never build without a way to take it back. He'd been an engineer too, the kind who didn't trust anything without a backup plan. Not in machines, not in people. Over the years, the control layer had quietly renewed itself each quarter when she performed the scan. No one questioned it because no one knew it existed. Grant Kessler and the board certainly didn't. It had been her personal insurance policy, tucked away like a loaded ace. Now, as she scanned through the system logs, her lips curved in the faintest trace of a smile. The layer was still active. Her last biometric confirmation had been just 6 weeks ago, which meant it would run smoothly for another 42 days, unless she chose otherwise. And she could choose otherwise. To them, she was a discarded employee with no access. To the system, she was still the architect, the only person whose heartbeat and fingerprint could keep it alive. That kind of leverage wasn't noise. It was silence with teeth. Nova logged out, leaning back in her chair. She didn't slam doors or throw punches. That wasn't her style. Controlled defiance meant waiting, watching, letting the rope unspool until the right moment to pull. They thought they'd stripped her of power. In reality, they'd just handed her the perfect position to decide exactly when their world would stop turning. Nova was halfway through a late lunch when her phone lit up with a name she hadn't seen in over a year. Daniel Shaw, Department of Defense, Cybersecurity Division. She wiped her hands, took a breath, and answered. Nova. His voice was low, urgent. I don't have much time. You need to know something about Cassandra Vale. Her fork stilled over the plate. Go on. She's been investigated before. Industrial espionage, Stratavance systems. The name hit like static in her ears. Stratavance, the company that had fought tooth and nail for the same $1.7 billion contract and lost it to Tri-Span just weeks ago. Daniel continued. We couldn't make anything stick back then. She covered her tracks, but her patterns, they're familiar. Too familiar. Nova didn't respond right away. The smart move here wasn't outrage, it was leverage. "Why are you telling me this now?" she asked. "Because," Daniel said. "The moment I heard she'd replaced you, I ran the timeline. And there's something else. She met with Grant Kessler the exact week Stradivance lost that contract." Nova's pulse slowed. A strange calm settling in. Pieces were shifting into place. Cassandra hadn't just appeared out of nowhere. She'd been positioned. She glanced at the secure terminal in the corner of her study, still powered down from the morning. "Daniel," she said quietly, "I can't give you accusations, but I can give you activity logs, things she's tried to access, times she's been somewhere she shouldn't be." "You'd be doing us both a favor," he replied. An hour later, Nova sent him a compressed file of system logs, pulled from the hidden monitoring she'd left running in the background. Each entry showed failed access attempts, unusual queries, and timestamps that lined up with the week before she was replaced. She didn't add commentary. She didn't have to. Within minutes, Daniel texted back, "Got it! We'll keep this discreet." And Nova, "Good move." Nova leaned back in her chair, letting the quiet fill the room. She didn't have to storm into an office or shout into a phone. This was cleaner, a silent push that would ripple outward. If the government started watching Cassandra, every step she took would weigh heavier, every mistake harder to bury. She closed her laptop and looked toward the window. The city outside moved on, as if nothing had changed. But Nova knew better. Somewhere, the first domino had just been tipped. Growing suspicion wasn't about doubt anymore. It was about certainty taking shape, and the slow, deliberate patience of someone who knew exactly how to let the truth reveal itself. The apartment was quiet, except for the faint hum of Nova's secure workstation powering up. She slid into the chair, her movements precise, deliberate. No rush. No wasted motion. The login sequence recognized her instantly, an unbroken chain of authentication protocols she had designed herself. When the tri-span control interface finally loaded, the first thing she saw was the timer. 42 hours. 16 minutes. 9 seconds until the next biometric confirmation was required. She leaned back, eyes narrowing slightly. The distribution control layer was working exactly as intended, without her fingerprint and retinal scan. The system would move into protective lockdown, freezing every operational node. It wouldn't crash. It wouldn't destroy data. It would simply stop, an immovable object in the middle of a billion-dollar highway. Her gaze drifted to the far corner of the desk, where a chipped ceramic coffee mug sat, stained from years of use. The mug read, "Lab rats do it better," a gag gift from her very first engineering team. She'd been 26, fresh out of a defense contract internship, and already running circles around veterans twice her age. That team had stayed late with her on nights when deadlines loomed, and it had been those nights, over cold coffee and greasy takeout, that had built the foundation of tri-span systems. She wrapped her hands around the mug now, grounding herself in the memory. This wasn't just about a job or a title. It was about the work, the people who'd trusted her, and the architecture she had poured herself into. A flicker on the screen pulled her back. She opened the latest system activity logs, scanning for anomalies. One entry made her pause. User: Cassandra Vale. Attempted firmware update. Status: blocked. Nova's lips pressed into a thin line. The control layer had done its job, automatically rejecting any update attempt without her cryptographic key. But the fact that Cassandra was trying to push firmware changes, less than a week into her lead engineer role, told Nova two things. First, Cassandra was out of her depth. Second, someone was feeding her instructions. She highlighted the log and encrypted a copy for her personal archive. It was one more card in the growing hand she planned to play. The timer on the dashboard ticked down by a few seconds. Nova didn't feel anxious. She felt steady, coiled like a spring. 42 hours was plenty of time to decide whether the lockdown would happen naturally or be encouraged to arrive sooner. She closed the logs, the faintest shadow of a smile touching her face. The clock was running, and for once, it was running entirely in her favor. By Monday morning, the countdown had slipped under 30 hours. Nova sipped her coffee slowly, the mug warm in her hands. As the city outside woke to another work week, she had no intention of being part of their rush. Her work now was quieter and far more satisfying. At 8:12 a.m., her phone lit up with an unfamiliar corporate number. She didn't need to answer to know it was from TriSpan. The call went to voicemail. 2 minutes later, another came through, this time from Grant's direct line. She let it ring until the automated voice cut in. Cold satisfaction settled in her chest. Her laptop screen, open to a secure newsfeed, pinged with an alert. TriSpan hit with federal verification request for lead engineer credentials. She clicked through. The request was standard procedure when certain security thresholds were triggered. Thresholds Nova knew the control layer had just brushed against. Without her biometric confirmation, Grant couldn't give them what they needed. The phone rang again, and again. The third time, she picked it up, not to answer, but to watch the call ID blink. She pressed decline and set the phone face down. The silence afterward was better than any argument she could have made. In TriSpan's glass-walled executive suite, Grant was pacing. Cassandra stood by the conference table, scrolling frantically through her tablet. "They need the biometric signature," Grant said sharply. "Yours won't work." "I can use Nova's," Cassandra replied, lifting a file from her tablet. The image of Nova's signature, scanned from an old project approval form, glowed on the screen. She transferred it to the verification portal with a smug look. Seconds later, the system flashed red. "Forgery detected. Access denied." Grant's jaw clenched. "Where did you get that?" "It doesn't matter," Cassandra snapped, though her voice trembled. "We just need another—" "It matters," he cut in, "because now they know we tried to fake it." Nova, miles away, leaned back in her chair and exhaled through her nose. Not a laugh, not quite a smile, but something colder. She'd embedded anti-forgery protocols into the control layer years ago, precise enough to detect the difference between her pen pressure and a scanned image. The newsfeed refreshed with another alert. Federal liaison demands immediate compliance or suspension of active clearances. She pictured Grant's face at that moment, the sheen of confidence cracking under the weight of a problem he couldn't delegate away. The first cracks had formed. She didn't need to lift a finger. All she had to do was let the castle crumble from within. At 8 a.m. sharp, the control layer made its silent decision. Across the TriSpan network, secure channels went dark. Internal messages stalled mid-transmission. Files locked themselves into read-only mode. Video conference feeds froze on half-formed words. In the government operations control rooms, windowless floors lined with blinking monitors, the calm hum of routine shattered. Alarms blared. Red banners crawled across every screen. Communications suspended. Security authorization required. Technicians swiveled in their chairs, barking status updates over the noise. "We've lost live relay to command," one called out. "Field units can't authenticate," shouted another. The air smelled faintly of overheated wiring and stale coffee. The way rooms do when tension builds faster than oxygen can move. Miles away, Nova sat on her balcony, hands wrapped around a mug of Earl Grey. The morning breeze lifted a strand of hair across her cheek as the low murmur of the city played beneath the news anchor's voice on her radio. Breaking developments in the TriSpan communications network. Sources confirm a widespread suspension of secure channels between 3 federal agencies. The cause is currently under investigation, but early reports suggest a critical authentication failure. Nova took a slow sip. The steam warmed her lips, and for a moment, she allowed herself to appreciate the stillness. To anyone else, this was a crisis. To her, it was a perfectly timed shift in the balance of power. Back at Trispan headquarters, Grant's voice carried through the glass walls of the executive floor. "Get them back online, now!" He barked into his headset. Cassandra hovered beside him, pale and tight-lipped. "Tell them we're handling it," she urged, her eyes darting to the cluster of executives whispering near the elevators. The conference line crackled. A stern voice from the Department of Homeland Security cut through. "Until we have clarity, all work under the Trispan contract is suspended. We have reason to believe an internal actor may be involved." Grant's face drained of color. "Internal actor? That's absurd." "Then you won't mind cooperating fully with the investigation," the voice replied, and the line went dead. Nova leaned back in her chair, watching a pigeon settle on the balcony railing. She didn't smile, didn't gloat. This wasn't victory yet. It was the first real fissure in their facade. Controlled chaos meant letting events unfold just enough to push her enemies off balance, without revealing the hand that set it all in motion. She poured the rest of her tea into the garden planter and stood, the radio still murmuring about security protocols and contract suspensions. The world thought Trispan had a technical problem. She knew better. The system wasn't broken. It was simply waiting. For her. The Department of Homeland Security's suspension order still echoed in Trispan's conference room when a new email pinged into Grant Kessler's inbox. It came from Martin Hale, a mid-level compliance manager who normally avoided direct contact with the CEO. The subject line was simple: contract clause, security lead replacement. Grant clicked it open. Attached was a PDF, a scanned page from the original government contract, dated 3 years earlier. The language was brutal in its precision. In the event that the lead systems engineer is replaced by an individual not meeting the government's minimum security and technical clearance standards, all active contracts shall be deemed null and void without compensation. Below, it was his own signature, crisp and clear. The room seemed to tilt slightly. "Where did you get this?" he demanded into the speakerphone. Martin's voice was almost apologetic. "From our records. You signed it yourself during the security compliance audit 3 years ago." But Grant's mind was already spinning back to that audit. He remembered the week. He'd been out of town, stuck in back-to-back investor meetings. He hadn't attended the final review. Someone else had handled it. His gaze slid sideways to Cassandra. She shifted in her seat, eyes fixed on the table. "You were there," he said slowly. "I was assisting," she replied, too quickly. "You signed for me." "It was a formality," Cassandra said, her tone brittle. Grant leaned forward. "You signed my name on a document that voids a $1.7 billion contract if you don't meet security clearance, and you don't." Her silence was answer enough. Across the city, Nova was at her kitchen counter, scrolling through her own copy of the clause. She'd drafted the language herself, anticipating the day when someone might try to slide an unqualified replacement into her role. It had taken weeks of back and forth with government counsel, but in the end, she'd secured it, hidden in plain sight, buried on page 47 of the contract. It was ruthless foresight, not luck, that made this moment possible. On her phone, a news alert appeared. Federal review of Trispan contract uncovers compliance breach. Voiding procedures under consideration. Nova read the headline twice, then set the phone down. The dominoes were falling exactly where she had placed them, back at Trispan. Martin added the final blow. "I thought you should be aware. Grant, DHS already has a copy of this page. They've flagged it as a non-negotiable breach." Grant stared at Cassandra. the truth crystallizing in his mind. The chaos outside was nothing compared to the implosion that had just begun inside. For Nova, there was no gloating, no celebration, only the clean, sharp satisfaction of a move made years in advance finally delivering its inevitable result. At 9 a.m., the first notice hit Trispan's secure inbox. The Department of Homeland Security formally terminated their contract, citing non-compliance with security clearance requirements. By 9:02, the Department of Defense followed. Their message, colder, effective immediately. All Trispan system access is revoked. All personnel credentials have been deleted from our network. At 9:04, the final blow came from the Federal Communications Authority. A single sentence ended the last of the $1.7 billion deal. We are exercising our contractual right to withdraw in full without compensation. In the executive suite, Grant's phone buzzed without pause. Cassandra stood rigid beside him, staring at the wall as though she could will it to open and swallow her whole. Department representatives were no longer taking his calls. The castle wasn't just cracking now, it was caving in. Across the city, Nova sat at her kitchen table, laptop closed, tea still warm in her mug. Her phone buzzed once. The sender was a name she hadn't seen in months. Evan Rhodes. It's done. 2 words, no punctuation. She read them twice, her breath settling into a long, even exhale. The knot that had been sitting in her chest since that boardroom meeting began to loosen. Just slightly, the radio on her counter switched to breaking news. Trispan Technologies faces full-scale contract collapse this morning, after all 3 federal agencies withdrew from their agreements within minutes of each other. Sources close to the investigation suggest the withdrawals are linked to a breach of security protocol and possible insider activity. Nova didn't smile. The feeling wasn't giddy or wild. It was something steadier, a release of pressure, like a valve turning after years of overstrain. Then her phone buzzed again. This time, the message came from an unknown number. Check your inbox. You'll want to see this. She opened her secure email. Inside was a single encrypted file. No subject line. Sent from a Trispan domain. When she decrypted it, her eyes scanned the contents quickly. Internal chat logs, timestamps, and a forwarded chain of messages. Cassandra, in black and white, passing sensitive access instructions to a Stratavance contact and complaining about how the old engineer had made the system too locked down to move quickly. The sender's identity appeared only once, in the signature block of the original email. Liam Park, systems analyst. She didn't know Liam, but she understood his choice. Some people saw the writing on the wall and decided not to be standing under it when it fell. Nova closed the file, stored it in her encrypted archive, and looked out the window. The city moved on, unaware of the quiet triumph in that apartment. For her, it wasn't about headlines. It was about the simple truth that the system she'd built had just done exactly what she intended, and no one else could claim the credit. 3 months later, the air in the conference room felt entirely different. The long mahogany table wasn't Trispan's. It belonged to Nova's new headquarters. Smaller, quieter, but hers entirely. Sunlight spilled across polished wood, catching the edge of a thick contract stamped with the federal seal. Across from her sat 3 government officials, their expressions open but serious. The lead representative adjusted his glasses, slid the final page forward, and handed her a pen. As of today, he said, we're officially awarding this contract to your firm. Nova glanced down at the document. The numbers were substantial, not as inflated as Trispan's, but clean, fair, and free of the rot that had poisoned her last deal. She signed without hesitation. The ink flowed steady, unbroken. On the table beside her sat a framed photo of her old engineering team. She'd brought it from her apartment that morning. But this time, she wasn't holding it with grief. Her smile in that picture, taken years ago, before the politics and the betrayal, now matched the one on her face in the present. As the officials gathered their papers, one lingered behind. He lowered his voice. Off the record, Nova, we've wanted you for this role for a long time. We just had to wait for Kessler to take himself out of the equation. Cleaner that way. Nova met his gaze. There was no need to answer. The truth was already understood between them. Later, alone in her office, she walked to the window and looked out over the city. It was the same skyline she'd seen from Trispan's top floor. But it no longer felt like someone else's view. Every decision here was hers. Every win would be hers too. Her phone buzzed with a message from Evan. Proud of you. She typed back a simple, thank you, knowing he'd understand the weight behind it. A knock at the door brought in her assistant with the first agenda for the new project kickoff. Nova scanned it quickly, then set it aside. Let's get to work, she said. In the quiet that followed, she picked up the pen again, tapped it against the signed contract, and murmured the same words she'd spoken the first day she was asked if she could secure the system. You already know the answer. Sometimes justice doesn't arrive with noise. It comes quietly, in your own time, on your own terms. Nova's story is a reminder that integrity, patience, and preparation can outlast ego, betrayal, and greed. If this story struck a chord with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment with your perspective. Hit the like button if you believe in standing your ground. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories of resilience, revenge, and redemption.